This is the statue of Saigo Takamori, referred to as the last samurai. He and his childhood friend Okubo together with Ryoma Sakamoto of the Chose clan in northern Kyushu, rebelled against the Bakufu, the shogun's corrupted 200-year-old families of advisors to the shogun. The rebellion was successful, but there was a falling out between Saigo and Okubo after they installed a Western-style democratic government, because Saigo wanted to continue on to invade Korea and then up into mainland China. Okubo was against the idea, and finally there was a confrontation between the two when Saigo and his students rebelled against the new Japanese government, and there was a series of major battles along Kyushu. Eventually the government forces trapped Saigo here in Kyushu, what was then in Kagoshima, what was then Satsuma, in Shiroyama Hill, where the battle continued to rage for several days. With Saigo's forces up in Shiroyama, they were able to pin down the government army in the city hall area that we just came from. Both sides were kind of in a bind. The government forces couldn't advance because they were in the open. Saigo's forces were running out of ammunition and food, but they did at least have a safe place to hide. I should clarify that Saigo's and Sakamoto's goal was to reinstate the emperor to his position on the throne after having been a religious figurehead for 200 years. So we're now at the Shiroyama observatory point, highest point in the city, not including Sakurajima, the island, which at the time this was happening back in the second half of the 1800s, Sakurajima was still a full island. It hadn't been connected to the mainland by the eruption in 1914 yet. So we're now overlooking the area of City Hall, which is down in this general area. So Saigo's men were up here. The Japanese government army was down around City Hall at an impasse. So where did Saigo's men find refuge? All right, little quick stop here. This is Don Square. So back a couple hundred years ago, when nobody had timepieces, the Satsuma family up here, or Shimazu family, had a dummy cannon, and it would go off at noon to tell everybody when to go to lunch. This was back when everything down below here was rice fields, and you had the castle Tsuramarujo just below the hill. This is Shiroyama Castle Hill. We're going to take a shortcut. Okay, so here we are at the back of the hill where Saigo had his cave where his men would hide. Now, this entire area was very heavily populated with farmers, merchants, travelers, as well as the family, Shimazu family. So there would have been a lot of foot traffic in this area and a lot of walking trails. So it would have been easy for Saigo to get around, but not for the army. The cave's not very big. Only goes back a little ways, maybe only like 10 feet. They used to have art displays back here. I assume that there's a light switch somewhere, but this is pretty much the extent of the cave where he and his students would hide out during the fighting. So we're not talking about anything really major here. All right, so Saigo and his students were fighting a losing battle. They were running out of ammunition. They were running out of food and water. Saigo realized that if he got caught, he would be executed in front of Okubo and his former friends, and he didn't really like that idea. So he ordered his commander-in-arms to cut his head off after he committed seppuku. and then hide it somewhere where nobody could ever find it, which actually happened. Nobody knows where Saigo's head went. Eventually, the fighting ended. The students were rounded up, the ones that were still alive. And the new Japanese government continued on fairly successfully in restructuring under the new Meiji Emperor, known as the Meiji Restoration, with the samurai being disarmed, having to hand in their swords, the samurai class being discontinued, and the government becoming more or less democratic based on the British Parliament. So what did happen with Saigo? Well, let's fast forward a little bit.